Look, DeMeco Ryans needs to be the next head coach of the Houston Texans. I have been breaking this thing down, looking at different candidates analytically, using checklists and spreadsheets. And at the end of the day, I just finally realized this week what it comes down to is that most of the time in the NFL, coaches who get hired are not being genuinely hired for their leadership abilities because there aren't that many genuine leaders out there. DeMeco Ryans is a genuine leader. I was a veteran player on the team when he came in as a rookie, and I'd never seen anybody as prepared, as mature, as even-tempered, and yet vicious in all the right football ways. He is, in a lot of ways, just the perfect person for football. DeMeco was a very, very good player. He has been a very good linebackers coach. He's been a very good defensive coordinator. And I'm convinced he's going to end up being the absolute best candidate, not just out of this job search, but he's got the potential to be one of the greats all time. He is a genuine leader of men, and there just aren't that many of those. Guys are getting hired because they're good offensive coordinators or they're good defensive coordinators. They're not getting hired because they actually know how to capture people's imagination, how to motivate them, how to get inside their heads and figure out what makes them tick. DeMeco does all these things, and that's a hard sell because it feels like you got to take people's word for it. And I think what you have to do is kind of do like what coaches do or scouts do when they're talking to college coaches about prospects. They read between the lines or they look for effusive praise. A college coach isn't usually going to say, well, yeah, this guy's just okay. He's not that good. They'll say, yeah, he's good. He's solid. He shows up. But the guys that are genuinely impressive, they are over the top in their praise, and scouts can tell and they can pick up on it. It's the difference between an obligatory obituary and somebody who is genuinely well loved in life. It's the difference between, well, he was I can tell you, John, he was a complicated person. Sure he was. Yeah, okay, that guy was a jerk. But when somebody says the world has lost a guiding light, I don't know how I'm going to go on without him. This man was unlike any other human being who ever walked this earth. That's DeMeco Ryans as a football coach. So I just ask you to first look at the resume. Second, look at what some of the things guys are saying about him are, how over the top they are in their praise, not just for the defense that he runs, but for the way he runs it. Nick Bosa, probable defensive player of the year, is a great example. I know some of you have seen this video. It's a short snippet, but it's really, really good.
Just the way he is as a coach and a leader he's the best coach I've been around. I could say that, yeah. Defensive coordinator for sure. I mean, I've had D-line coaches, but as a defensive coordinator, easily the best one I've been around.
What makes him so?
Just knowing the guys, knowing the team, obviously the scheme stuff, which I don't even deal with, but I just see what he does every week in meetings and how he addresses the young guys and us as a defense, and how hard he is on us, but how much he congratulates us and is positive at the same time. I think he just has really figured out how to perfectly push us, but not push us too hard and not give us too much credit. Just really good.
Kind of thread the needle.
Exactly, yeah. And it seems simple, but it's really not. And he's gotten better at it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, has it always been like
No,
that?
I think he's getting better, just like us as a defense.
Okay, so that's Nick Bosa, current player for DeMeco Ryans. DeMeco's been the defensive coordinator for San Francisco for 2 years. San Francisco has the best defense in the league this year. Here's a guy who's known him a lot longer. This is Johnny Holland. He was linebackers coach back in 2006, and he didn't think we were going to have a shot at DeMeco Ryans because Gary Kubiak had just been hired. They ended up taking Mario Williams with the first pick overall. So what's an offensive coach going to do when the offense was almost dead last the previous season? Johnny Holland, who absolutely loves DeMeco Ryans, was beyond himself with joy when the Texans ended up drafting DeMeco Ryans. This is what he says about him now. He's the most polished guy as a human and as a player and as a leader that I've been around in my 35 years of being around the game. And that is 100% the kind of stuff you hear people say about DeMeco Ryans over and over and over again. I say it myself. I was a 10th-year veteran when DeMeco was a rookie, and I was not happy with any rookie ever getting elevated to a starting position very early in camp. I was just kind of at least wanted to think I was old school and thought guys should earn it. So when DeMeco started taking reps with the one and replaced the veteran player, I was a little PO'd. And the first day in camp, he was struggling to spit out the play in the huddle once. There was a lot of verbiage, and our defensive coordinator at the time was new too. So I kind of got on him. I yelled at him, and I could see in his eyes that DeMeco was like, he gave me almost like a patient fatherly look. And it was, I swear to you, it was one of the weirdest things that's ever happened to me in terms of being up and probably taking ripped fuel at the time or something, and just kind of immediately calmed, almost like a wild animal. And he got the play out. Now, and I'll be honest with you, within a couple weeks, I was stifling the urge to call him sir because he was just that dialed in. I've told that story before, and I think some of you thought I was exaggerating. Johnny Holland says they used to call him Cap for captain, and he was a rookie. The veteran players would call him that. It was go talk to Cap out there to see how he's going to handle this. And there are so many stories like that. That was when he was a rookie. It was interesting to me as I was reading various articles about DeMeco that in his early years, the guys that played with him with the Texans or guys like myself who were older would gush about his ability to diagnose offensive plays, his ability to figure things out as a young player. He was constantly talking to the guys on the offense, and that's key for what we'll talk about later when he tries to fill out his staff. But he was constantly talking to guys on the offense. Matt Schaub says, in the locker room, in the meal room, on the field, on the side, when our reps are over, hey, I saw this formation. Is this something we should look for off of that, like a play action or something? He always wanted to visualize because defense looks at things from offensive formations. So that was really cool to see all those guys say that. But as you start talking to people that played with him with the Eagles, it turns into them gushing about his leadership and all of that. And a lot of guys with the Texans, don't get me wrong, will gush about his leadership. But as he got older, he became an even better leader, and he became even more of that big brother type to a lot of players. And he's continued that on into his coaching career. And it's been really cool to watch him take some of these guys, like Fred Warner, the middle linebacker for the 49ers. Now, Fred Warner came into the league in 2018. That was DeMeco's first year as inside linebackers coach with the 49ers. Now, Fred Warner is a very talented player. DeMeco would deny that he had anything to do with Fred Warner becoming one of the best inside linebackers in the league. But it's no coincidence. And DeMeco, I think, each step along the way, as Kyle Shanahan would tell you, has gotten better and better. So Kyle Shanahan was with DeMeco when DeMeco was a rookie with the Houston Texans. Kyle Shanahan was just a young receivers coach at that time. And Kyle Shanahan, when he found out that DeMeco wanted to coach, brought him right into the 49ers. And he says DeMeco is so naturally talented, and he's so good at everything he's ever done, and he really understands football. He did as a player, he did as a quality control in his first year, he did as a linebacker coach, and he has as a coordinator, and he was good right away. And then he goes on to talk about how he's gotten better. And I think you see that from last year to this year. It's not just a matter of, hey, DeMeco's got a bunch of talent on that defense, so that's all he has to do is be a custodian of all this talent. He got better from last year to this year. He has done things with the non-marquee players on that team that have been very creative. And he's really, through a combination of discipline and scheme, gotten the most out of Charles Omenihu, a former Texan, Tashawn Gibson, a former Texan. Hufanga is a safety who's doing some really cool things as a young player. And you see it on and on and on. These players just talk and gush about what DeMeco has meant for them. The Fred Warner part is interesting to me because Christian Harris is a young middle linebacker for the Texans who has a lot of potential. And he looked like a rookie at times this year. He looked like a future All-Pro at times this year. And it's a little bit hazardous to think that, hey, a guy who is a good position coach can translate and transfer all that knowledge as a head coach. But I do think that schematically, he's not going to be coaching Christian Harris himself, but schematically, I think he can position Christian Harris the best way, and especially in coverage, really help him out and get the absolute most out of Christian Harris. Now, that's not the only reason, obviously, that you would look to hire a head coach. There's a whole lot more to it. There is the offensive side of the ball. And this is the very, very valid concern, which is that in modern football, it's really hard to retain a good offensive coordinator. They tend to get plucked up into a head coaching job very, very quickly if they have a good offense. Oftentimes, they'll end up sucking, and then they get demoted again, which means that there is always somebody available. There's always a failing head coach out there who's actually a pretty good offensive coordinator. But the key is, if you're a defensive-minded coach, how do you continually replace those offensive coordinators? I think with DeMeco, I worry less about it than with some other guys for a couple of reasons. One, like what we heard from Matt Schaub, DeMeco has been a student of this game and of this offense. And more critically, he has been a student of a Kubiak-Shanahan scheme since he came into the league as a rookie. So as he was picking apart and trying to understand exactly why Matt Schaub and Arian Foster and that great offensive line or Andre Johnson were doing what they're doing during practice, or as he's a defensive coordinator now, scheming against Kyle Shanahan, sitting in game plan meetings, and I think most crucially, working with a lot of those coaches, understanding which guys have promise, the scuttlebutt. A word that my wife hates, but it's perfect. The scuttlebutt, when you get together in the offseason and you're talking about which guy's a genius and which guy's an up-and-comer and keep an eye on this guy, that's all very, very important. And when it comes to the alliances or the relationships with other offensive coaches around the league now, and look at all the Shanahan, Kubiak coaching tree guys that are out there right now. It's a pretty big network of guys who really understand that offense, and an offense that I really respect because it used to give me fits as a player. I used to hate going against the Kubiak Shanahan style offense because it's really, really good. I think that DeMeco is going to be very good in that regard, and more importantly, I think he's going to be able to work with that offensive coordinator. And the other thing, I'll go back to something that Johnny Holland said, which translates to coaching very well. DeMeco Ryans' focus on others. And when you're talking about coaching and helping guys get elevated to be a head coach, that's a part of the business that I think is often undersold. But the coaches who have a reputation for really trying to incubate their guys and get them better jobs, they attract a lot of good talent. You look at this story about Johnny Holland when he was at the Combine with DeMeco Ryans. So Johnny Holland asked DeMeco Ryans who he considered the best linebacker on Alabama's defense. DeMeco had been the SEC Defensive Player of the Year. Instead, the young linebacker didn't tout himself like so many prospects do before the draft, and instead spent the session pumping up friend and fellow linebacker Freddie Roach. And I can only tell you, and this is where a little bit of the trust comes in, that kind of stuff is genuine. I think there are a lot of guys that would do that, and they would do it in a calculated way. I think I myself, I'll be honest with you. If I were in that same situation, I think I would probably talk about my teammates, and I would feel genuine about it, but I would do it. There'd be a little bit of calculation there. With DeMeco, there's a genuine quality to where he just wants to, from a young age, he's felt like he needs to put his focus outward and help other people. And you can just sense it when you talk to him. Where, frankly, amongst NFL head coaches, there are a lot of big egos that are driven to greatness. And it works because it drives and drives and drives them. But they don't necessarily feel that same genuine love for their players and their coaches the way I think DeMeco will. So lots of football and personality trait reasons to hire DeMeco Ryans. I think there are a couple non-valid reasons to hire DeMeco Ryans, and it gets complicated because I'm not making a case against DeMeco here whatsoever. I just want to caution people that if you're trying to make this argument, if you're trying to contribute to the cause and, just put this out into the universe and the Twitterverse so that maybe the McNairs or Casario will start to feel the vibe, this stuff shouldn't matter. I think it might end up mattering. It shouldn't matter. But it will happen. If DeMeco gets hired as the coach, season ticket sales will escalate immediately. I think more so than Sean Payton, more so than any of those other guys. That shouldn't be the reason you make a long-term decision. But, it possibly could. It possibly might stoke sales. And that's not bad. That fosters a little bit of goodwill. You shouldn't want him just because he was a very good player. I think we've seen enough examples of guys who are very, very good players and end up being horrible football coaches, but vice versa as well. You just don't hear about the bad players who were bad coaches because you just don't hear about them at all. They just kind of fade off into oblivion. I was a good player, damn it. And I never tried coaching. So don't try to lump me into this conversation. So now, there is one off-field concern, and I think it's something that people have trepidation about, both in terms of actually getting DeMeco to accept the job and then also whether this is the right reason to hire DeMeco or not. I'm going to say this is a secondary reason and one that shouldn't be used but would be a very nice benefit. It's that with all of the controversy that the Texans have had over the last several years, with the beating that they take nationally, and a lot of it based on accusations of racial issues or what have you, I think that DeMeco understands and knows Cal McNair to a much larger degree, obviously, than any of these other candidates would. And I think that DeMeco can be very, very good in a lot of ways for the organization, healing a lot of old wounds, but also I think in DeMeco, perhaps being able to work with Cal McNair in a way and trust Cal McNair in a way that a lot of other people might not. And that lasts as long as it lasts. Obviously, like, nothing is ever certain, but I think that there are barriers and obstacles that the Texans have put up between them and the outside world at this point that they're trying really hard to tear down. And frankly, some of it is unfair because it's very easy for people outside the city to just kind of, lob fireballs into the city walls and not really think too much about it, where DeMeco understands and knows a lot more. I think, look, one part of it, too, and that I'm glad is less of a talking point, but one that needs to be addressed, is that DeMeco did sue the team for $10 million after he tore his Achilles tendon on the turf. That happened, I think, about almost a decade after I tore two of my hamstring tendons off my pelvis on that turf, on that stupid tray system. And I'll tell you, honestly, it probably something should have been done a long time before DeMeco did it. I'm not going to try to act like that lawsuit itself was a selfless act to try to protect players, but it may have partly been the reason. But I think that the after effects and the aftershock of that obviously hasn't kept Cal McNair from having a great admiration for DeMeco Ryans. And I think a lot of bygones are bygones from whatever that ordeal was with DeMeco. It really comes down to what can DeMeco do with the McNairs right now. And this will probably be the weirdest and most shocking thing that I think is actually true that I would say. I think the McNairs are actually an asset in trying to get DeMeco Ryans into the door. And I know a lot of people are skeptical of that, but the McNairs will do a couple things. One, it's that whatever you feel about Cal McNair as a person and in terms of his heart and where it is probably a lot different than people who have played for the McNairs or know Cal McNair a little bit. So there's that. That doesn't mean that everybody has to agree about everything or can't have issues with anything at all. But the big thing about Cal McNair right now as a football owner is that if he has a weakness, it's that he spends too much money. They're spending so much money, like on the order of probably $100 million or more on coaches that they fired, GMs that they fired. That includes assistant coaches. And look, I'm not trying to paint a picture of an ugly scenario as somehow awesome. It's an ugly scenario that they've made that many mistakes in hiring, but McNair each step along the way has said, if a coach or the GM thinks that money being spent is going to be for the best of the team, he's not going to say no. And we've seen that around the stadium in terms of some of the programs, the player development programs that they've put into place. I think the amount of money that they've spent on journeyman free agents just in the pursuit of keeping some semblance of a competitive culture has honestly been, whether you agree with it or not, pretty impressive. Like, they spent a lot of money on free agency on just 1 and 2 year deal guys as part of a strategy of being able to have older guys that can tutor some of these younger draft picks and teach them about the NFL. And look, we'll see how it all shakes out. I think if you look at the Rockets and the way things are going right now, you get the sense that, okay, we need a little bit more age out there at some point. We got to balance this out. This youth is great, but we need to balance some of this out with some age. And that's what the Texans are trying to do. Cal's not going to be a barrier with his wallet. And that's where it gets scary a little bit as a fan, because Cal is like lottery money. It's going to go into the hands of somebody, and they are either going to blow it on monster trucks and be broke within a year of when their lottery payments stop, or they're going to invest it properly and they will help you find greatness. So it's a matter of Cal choosing the right lottery winner. Whoever that head coach is and the GM in Nick Caserio, you hope that they're going to do right, because Cal will spend that money. And I know that DeMeco's the right guy. A lot of people have asked me, okay, who would you compare DeMeco Ryans to as a coaching candidate? I think for current head coaches, Vrabel and Mike Tomlin are the easiest and most immediate guys that come to mind, because they're defensive-minded guys. Both of them only spent 1 year as a coordinator, and Tomlin actually had a really good year as a coordinator in Minnesota before he got the job. Vrabel was bad, but that's why I put this on the thumbnail. The leader of men, the haver of it. Battle Red Blog had that as a headline for Mike Vrabel when he's a coaching candidate, and I loved it. Leader of men, owner of it, which is funny except really kind of true. I think both those guys have those natural leadership traits that are identifiable immediately. DeMeco has the added benefit of being a very bright defensive mind, but also being that leader of men, that owner of it. I think if we were to go back a little further, Gary Kubiak is an easy one, just because I think Kubiak and several other coaches like Kubiak have demonstrated that it's possible to be a very effective NFL head coach without being quite as wacky or psychotic as frankly most NFL head coaches are. Even the ones, I say psychotic, I say it in a loving way, because some of those psychos, I love those psychos. Tom Coughlin is psycho, but I love that psycho. So, but DeMeco is freakishly well-rounded and even-tempered. I would go to Joe Gibbs. I would aspire for DeMeco to be a defensive version of Joe Gibbs, a guy who is just roundly considered a decent human being that could be a hard ass like Nick Bosa was talking about, but could also, the vast majority of the time, do it in the positive way, like DeMeco always tries to keep it. As far as DeMeco versus Sean Payton, and I don't know why this isn't talked about more, but if you're an organization and you're trying to hire the person who's best for that organization, not just on the football field, but perhaps can really shed some positive light, bring some positive light to the organization. Who among these candidates is most likely to contribute to a pool of money to go out and injure the opponent? Gosh, I guess I'd put DeMeco right smack dab at the bottom, along with everybody else except Sean Payton.
Our guys know from not only training camp, they know from OTAs, like our first meeting with our guys, like that's who we're going to be. Like, we're going to be a physical defense. So guys understand that before we even put pads on. They understand the style of play. We have to play as a defense, and we carry that on throughout training camp. Is it going to be tough? Yes, it's going to be tough, but anything worth having, you got to work hard at it, right? It's not going to be easy. It's not easy to be a physical defense, right? And coaches are grinding each and every week to bring that physicality out of you, but when you got the right guys in the locker room who have that mindset, like, I don't have to speak on it much, because you will stick out like a sore thumb if you're not being physical on our defense.
So I'm asking you to do something difficult. I'm asking you to put your faith in people who are screaming it from the rooftops, guys like J.J. Watt, who have played with DeMeco Ryans, who said, As a rookie, I bought my first house across the street from DeMeco because if DeMeco thought it was the right place to live, it was the right place to live for me. Captain, leader, smart, tough, personable, crushed it as a DC. He will be a great head coach. And there are so many guys that feel the exact same way about DeMeco. Do this, Houston Texans. Hire DeMeco Ryans. Pay him as much money as he wants. He won't ask for as much as he probably could get because he's just so damn humble. So pay him a little bit more. Give him 10% more than whatever he agrees to. Can you do that? Can you do that for all of us?